Welcome. Today we are diving headfirst into one of the most ambitious and honestly mind-bending movements in the history of thought, German idealism. This is a revolutionary idea that didn't just want to change philosophy, it aimed to change our entire understanding of reality itself.
So get ready for this. What if everything you've ever been taught about looking out there for answers, to science, to the stars, to the material world, what if that was only half the story?
What if the ultimate key to unlocking the secrets of the cosmos wasn't out there at all, but was actually found by looking inward? That, right there, is the absolutely radical and world-changing premise of German idealism.
Okay, so to really get why this idea was so explosive, we first have to understand the world it was fighting against. And that world was seen as a giant, cold, impersonal machine.
You see, for a long time, thanks to thinkers like Newton, the most popular model of the universe was this mechanistic view. Reality was basically a massive clockwork machine, predictable, fixed, just a static series of cause and effect. But the German idealists, they looked at that and said, no way. They proposed something totally different, an organic, developing process where everything is connected and constantly changing and growing.
And this is the nagging question that the whole clockwork universe just couldn't answer. I mean, if everything is just a cog in a machine governed by unbreakable physical laws, then what does that make us? Are we just complex little machines too? This view left basically no room for the human spirit, for freedom, creativity, or even consciousness itself. It was a philosophical dead end, and it was screaming for a revolution.
And that revolution? Well, it began with one pivotal figure who completely changed the game, Immanuel Kant. He didn't just tweak the rules of philosophy, he basically flipped the entire board over.
Kant's big move is famously called his Copernican revolution. See, before him, everyone just assumed our minds conform to the world we see. Kant did a complete 180 and said, no, the world as we experience it has to conform to our minds. Our consciousness isn't a blank slate waiting for data. It has built-in structures, categories, that actively shape and organize everything we perceive. Suddenly, the key wasn't just out there, it was in here.
So the German idealists who came after Kant took this incredible idea and just ran with it. They pushed it to its most radical and kind of breathtaking conclusion. They started asking, if our minds structure our experience of the world, then, well, maybe our minds structure everything.
Here's a great way to think about it, making shadow puppets. Imagine your hand is the self. The flashlight you're holding is your consciousness. And that huge, moving, complex image on the wall, that's reality. The idealists argued that if we could just understand the fundamental shape of our own consciousness, the hand, we could understand the shape of reality itself. Why? Because reality is just a projection of the self.
This is it. This is the absolute core thesis. Let that sink in. They weren't just saying our minds filter reality. They were saying the very architecture of our minds is the architecture of reality. To understand yourself is, in a profound way, to understand the cosmos. And this was a huge, huge shift. They stopped searching for a static, unchanging soul, like some kind of ghost in the machine. Instead, they wanted to understand the self as a process, as an activity. They got fascinated by how consciousness works, how it actively takes all our messy, scattered experiences and weaves them into a single, coherent story.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, while all the idealists agreed that the self was the master key, they didn't quite agree on what that key was made of. They all had different ideas about what the most fundamental, the most central part of our consciousness actually is.
So this led to four major paths. You had Fichte, who argued that at our core we are moral beings. Our free will and our sense of duty are what unify our whole experience. Then there was Schelling, the great philosopher of Romanticism, who said no, it's our aesthetic and creative drive. Schleiermacher believed the unifying core was actually religious consciousness, that deep feeling of absolute dependence on something greater. And finally, you have the big one, Hegel, who argued it was our conceptual power, our ability to reason and use concepts that truly defines and holds the self together.
So this one central idea that the self structures reality had this massive domino effect. It didn't just change one part of philosophy, it demanded a whole new way of thinking about, well, pretty much everything.
First off, they needed a totally new method. The old way of using rigid logical proofs just didn't work when you're trying to talk about a dynamic living consciousness. So they pioneered phenomenology.
It's a careful, descriptive approach. The goal wasn't to prove something with a logical formula, but to describe an experience so clearly and richly that someone else could read it and say, ah, yes, I see it too. It was philosophy as a careful observation of what it's actually like to be conscious.
Second, they needed a new kind of logic. Traditional logic was built for a static world, full of unchanging truths. But for a universe that's constantly in flux, constantly developing, they needed a logic of process. And this is the famous dialectic, a process where an idea, a thesis, runs into its opposite, an antithesis. The conflict between them is then resolved in a higher, more complex synthesis, which then becomes a new thesis. It's a logic of conversation, of growth, designed for a world of change.
And finally, all of this led to a completely new way of thinking about God. If reality is the unfolding of some great mind or spirit, then the divine isn't some separate being out there watching from afar. Instead, the divine is immanent. It's present and unfolding within the very processes of history, nature, and human consciousness itself.
And make no mistake, this wasn't just a bunch of guys writing dusty books for a shelf. This way of thinking had enormous real-world consequences. It directly fueled the artistic explosion of Romanticism, which celebrated the power of the creative individual. It also laid the philosophical groundwork for modern nationalism, the idea that a nation has its own unique spirit trying to realize itself in history. It completely reshaped the modern world.
So we end with this final, massive, almost dizzying question. You see, the idealists made a distinction between our individual, finite self and the absolute self, the ultimate, all-inclusive ground of all being. So if our small, personal consciousness is a microcosm of the whole, like a tiny flashlight projecting its own little reality, then what in the world is the nature of that ultimate, all-encompassing consciousness? What shadow is it casting? That is the grand and perhaps unanswerable question that German idealism leaves us to wonder about.